Hello and welcome to the Week 4 Rest of Season Top 150 Rankings Show. Today we're going to cover all the biggest changes we've made to our rankings. Be sure to stay tuned to the end as we'll give 6 moves to make this week. All right. Let's start at the top here, guys. I think people are going to be looking at the rankings and be like, oh my God, how did Keenan Allen get into the top 8? Because most of the guys in our first round now are guys that were close or in the first round before the season started. Keenan Allen is one whose early season setup has just gone absolutely nuclear. They lose Austin Eckler. They don't throw the ball to Josh Kelly. They have this insanely high pass rate. They play fast. Now Mike Williams is down. It's just an incredible setup for Keenan Allen. Now, I don't know what you can do here, Mark. Wait, one thing that you could consider if you have Keenan Allen is selling high. You say, look at the ETR rankings. Keenan Allen is 8th overall in the ETR rankings. I can sell Keenan Allen for someone incredible. Maybe Travis Kelce, maybe CeeDee Lamb, maybe Steph Diggs, maybe someone like that. If you had Keenan Allen, Mark, how would you be playing it right now?
I think I'd just be holding and celebrating that he's on my team and you kind of dodged the Chargers bullets. You know, this was an offense we wanted to invest in all offseason, and we were above market on Eckler, Keenan, and Mike Williams. So if you've had Eckler, it's kind of run out pretty well for you so far, and I'd want to keep riding that train. I mean, you know, he's not going to get 20 targets and over 200 receiving yards every week, but certainly I think we can count on him for 10, 11, 12 targets every week. With Mike Williams going down, that's certainly a big body in the red zone that's removed from the Chargers offense. So I think, you know, the utilization of Keenan Allen early on is so strong that he's a locked in wide receiver one moving forward. And we want those guys on our team. So I'd lean holding him. There's probably not too much in return that I'd want, unless I'm just absolutely stacked at wide receiver and need some running back help. That would be potentially it. But I don't think I'm really trading him for other, you know, top end wide receivers right now.
I like that take. I think that I would not be selling Keenan Allen either. One thing that I've been thinking about, which is dangerous because I am no tape bro, but the more teams play too high safety, the more teams dare the offense to work underneath. It's just better for guys like Keenan Allen. I mean, it's just better. I know he caught some long ones against the Vikings, but yeah, it's just incredible setup for Keenan Allen now. Jack, let's move to a guy who we were actually lower than market on. Silva was way lower than market on before the season. Looks good now, and that is Derrick Henry. If you have Derrick Henry now, which, you know, hopefully if you are an ETR person, you don't, we have dropped Derrick Henry all the way down to 48th overall. I have concerns that the wheels are going to come off the Titans here. And I hate saying that because I have so much respect for Mike Vrabel. But if the wheels come off and you're talking about Will Levis or Malik Willis, that would be very bad for Derrick Henry. If anything, it's tough for me to sell after Henry's game last week, which was so miserable against a very good Cleveland defense. But I don't know about holding the bag with this guy. Jack, if you had Derrick Henry, what are you thinking right now?
I think I'd probably just be holding. I agree that he's not, the outlook for him is not good. Tyjae Spears has outsnapped him in 2 of the Titans' 3 games so far, which would have been unheard of if you told me that 3 or 4 weeks ago. But I mean, he's still getting a good chunk of the carries. He has a 75% designed rush share this year. That was 82% last year. So that's a slight downturn from where he was last year, but he's still getting the overwhelming majority of the carries. And then Tyjae Spears is kind of in the Dontrell Hilliard plus role. The concern, I guess, is, as you mentioned, the wheels could come off. He's up there in age. The offensive line is bad. He's only at 3.2 yards per carry. Like, it might not be the same Derrick Henry where, you know, even if he gets 20 carries, it's just like a print fest. He might not be the same guy. The Titans might not be able to make him the same guy. But I think that people are kind of realizing that. So it is league dependent. If someone sees the big name Derrick Henry and says that they want to buy low, I'd be fine selling a little bit lower than what you paid for him. But I think in a lot of leagues that you're not really going to be able to get off of him for something meaningful.
Well, he's still a massive name, right? And I think there's like some name value. People are going to want Derrick Henry. There's the whole Dehember thing. And so we have him as like a late 4th round value now. If you could get someone that has 3rd round value, you know, I certainly prefer Aaron Jones. I certainly prefer Michael Pittman. I certainly prefer Mike Evans at this point, Joe Mixon, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker. I mean, if I get any of those for Derrick Henry right now, just on name value, I think that's worth considering. Oh, you know what we should do, Mark? we shouldn't talk about Chargers wide receivers without talking about Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer, because my take, I think, is different than market. I just think Josh Palmer can play well enough to succeed in this scheme. And I'm not saying Josh Palmer is Jamar Chase. I'm not saying Josh Palmer is Justin Jefferson or even Mike Williams, but I think he's good enough in this setup that is so favorable to Chargers wide receivers. Like, I think he's good enough to succeed here. We have Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer very, very close, 95 and 99. I don't want to say bad things about rookie first round picks who are talented with a path to opportunity, but I might prefer Josh Palmer over Quentin Johnston rest of season. And I think I prefer Josh Palmer probably more than most people at ETR. So yeah, Mark, how do you think about Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer rest of season in the trade markets and stuff like that?
I think it's interesting because their bye is in week 5, and obviously we're about to enter week 4. So we're going to get one game before they enter the bye. And typically we see rookies kind of emerge from the bye with a bigger role. They're able to, get involved in the offense a bit more, utilized a bit more. I do think it's very fair to say that Joshua Palmer is the wide receiver 2, right now in this offense, is going to be out there for more routes than Quentin Johnston. But just when teams invest the first round pick, I mean, we've seen draft capital go crazy and in other circumstances. Typically it's at quarterback, but we've also seen it like with Najee Harris over Jalen Warren in Pittsburgh. If teams spend a first round pick on those players, they want to get them on the field and try and showcase that they're a good pick. So I think Josh Palmer is probably the better start in week 4 against the Raiders, which is a great matchup for the Chargers right out of the gate here. I do think down the stretch of the season that Quentin Johnston is likely to be a more valuable fantasy asset. Again, I think that is the more popular opinion. I do think Josh Palmer is probably going to be cheaper, especially in like sharper leagues, that you could probably get him for cheaper, and it might not be that much worse of a bet at that point. So I do see the case for both sides, but personally, I am prioritizing Quentin Johnston.
All right, Jack, let's go to the Jets stuff. This is so hard. This is one that I think if we knew who the quarterback was going to be of the Jets, it would be a lot easier. Right now, we only have 2 Jets in our rest of season top 150, Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 21 and Breece Hall as the running back 19. Now, I've been saying ever since week 1 that we needed to sell Breece Hall. I mean, ever since he had that breakout in week 1 and they unfortunately lost Aaron Rodgers. It's not just how bad Zach Wilson is. It's also that Aaron Rodgers is so friendly, or was so friendly from a fantasy perspective, to running backs. Now we get Trevor Siemian in the mix. I'd love to see the Jets start Trevor Siemian. I don't think it's that close. Maybe this is crazy. I don't think it's that close that Trevor Siemian is so much better for this offense than Zach Wilson. And maybe we'll see that this week. I don't know that we will for sure. There's also other options that they could explore. Jacoby Brissett, Ryan Tannehill, maybe Kirk Cousins. I've heard other names bandied about. So we're trying to bake in here on Garrett Wilson, an extremely talented player who clearly is worse than our ranking if Zach Wilson is the quarterback. So, Jack, where are you at on Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and Jets stuff right now? If you had them, or maybe you could be trying to acquire them. Like if I thought that the Jets were going to get a quarterback, acquiring Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall would actually be a pretty sharp move right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it literally is just a quarterback question. Like you mentioned, Garrett Wilson has a 26% target share this year, which is elite. Breece Hall's snap share has risen each game, and Dalvin Cook's snap share has fallen each game. Breece played 49% of snaps last week, which was a season high. He also set season high in carries share, routes run. So the role is growing. Michael Carter is still getting third down snaps for now, but I don't think that's something that's going to hold the entire season. It's more a question of just when Breece starts getting those. So the role is growing for Breece Hall as we expected as he gets healthier, and Garrett Wilson has an elite target share. So if the Jets get a competent quarterback, then I think that it's kind of wheels up for Wilson and Hall. I personally cannot see them sticking with Zach Wilson that much longer. There was that report today that there's some infighting on the Jets, like the defense isn't very happy that Robert Saleh is just continuing to stick with Zach Wilson. So I don't think the leash is very long here. I don't know if it's going to be this week since they signed Trevor Siemian like yesterday. But I think week 5 or 6, it's probably not Wilson coming out there anymore. And then it's Wilson or Hall.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say is that it's really hard to acquire a quarterback, right? Like I've been suggesting names and saying it's harder than it seems to go out and acquire a quarterback. So I'm probably still not going out and trying to trade for these guys, Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall right now. But their value is so low that at this point, like hopefully you sold Brees Hall after week 1. Hopefully you sold Garrett Wilson. But if you didn't at this point, I feel like we kind of have to hold the bag on the Jet stuff and hope that they figure something out at quarterback. Commanders wide receivers, Mark, I feel like there's a disconnect probably between sharps who pushed up, alleged sharps, perhaps fake sharps like me, who pushed up Jahan Dotson into round 7 and 8, and the community and the macro community or the more casual community who's like, why would I take a Commanders wide receiver, let alone one who's never done that much in the NFL like Jahan Dotson, that high? And so you have to know your opponents here, but there's so many different opinions on Commanders pass game right now. Mark, how would you think about the trade market for Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson?
Well, I think, the good part about the Washington offense right now is they're throwing a lot compared to base expectation. They're 4th in the NFL in pass rate over expectation. So that's solid for them. And then I think all three of us believe that Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are solid to above average, NFL wide receivers, if not, good to great NFL wide receivers, especially when talking about McLaurin. So you have the talent, you have the potential opportunity, but so far the Washington target distribution has been pretty underwhelming, just, in terms of throwing it to wide receivers. Right now, the tight ends and running backs are taking up a huge chunk. Tight ends in the Washington passing game have the 3rd highest target share in the NFL. So, and then they're also have a revamped screen game that they're working a lot with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, getting targets to those guys in space. So, with Eric Bieniemy, we were excited about this offense, potentially what he could do. And the early signs have been good, but we've kind of seen the issue that happened in Kansas City where, they're spreading the ball around pretty equally, and we're not getting like a great target share for one specific guy. So it's certainly concerning. I would lean towards holding these guys rather than selling low. I would honestly, especially with McLaurin kind of having that toe issue coming into the end of the year, I think at this point we can see that or think that he's close to 100% health and might continue to get healthier as the season goes on. So I'd be more willing to kind of buy low on Terry McLaurin. I'm a little less optimistic on Jahan Dotson just because he does need more volume to succeed than Terry McLaurin. So it is kind of a tricky situation. I do think things will probably balance out, that they'll stop targeting Cole Turner and Logan Thomas as much as they are, and those will start going to McLaurin and Dotson. But again, we are kind of wish casting there a little bit, and NFL teams don't typically operate how fantasy managers want them to all the time. So it is a little bit of a tricky situation here right now.
Yeah, for sure. If they have to go to Brissett, I think that'd actually be a good thing for Dotson and McLaurin, and they might have to go to Brissett sooner rather than later. Sometimes in the trade market, I think an interesting thing to look for is where the box score, Jack, does not meet the same as the underlying usage. And that's kind of a huge part. I mean, that is a massive part of what we're doing on a week-to-week basis, trying to figure out where stuff happened in the box score that is not sticky, or stuff that didn't happen in the box score that is sticky in terms of usage that will lead to points. Jerome Ford's box score in week 3 was very, very strong. However, in Kareem Hunt's first game, I thought Kareem Hunt ate into Jerome Ford a bit more than I'd like. And then they closed the game with Pierre Strong. Now, I know that was a blowout situation, but still, it was Pierre Strong, not Jerome Ford, getting that. We have Jerome Ford up here as the RB 21, 56 overall. What do you think of Cleveland, handling Cleveland running back going forward here, Jack?
I'm not too panicked about Ford right now. I mean, it was a brutal run matchup against the Titans run defense, which is pretty much the hardest defense to run on in the NFL, and a pretty light defense to pass on. So I'm not too worried about, I think he only had 18 yards or something like that, which doesn't concern me too much. And then I keep coming back to the Kevin Stefanski quotes from last week about referring to Ford as the lead back and the featured back in different instances. I think Hunt is going to have a role for sure, but I still think Ford is going to be the primary back. But I think that this week will be pretty telling, considering that they announced pregame that Hunt was going to be on a snap count. So we'll see what the usage is like this week.
Yeah. And I think Jerome Ford, I think the Browns think / know that Jerome Ford is better. And I know when we say this, when everybody was saying that Dalvin Cook actually sucks and that it's just nobody wants to believe it with these running backs until it's completely over. Maybe Kareem Hunt, who says he lost weight, will bounce back and be really good. I doubt it. I do think Jerome Ford will remain ahead in that one. Mark, this JSN situation is bad, man. It's bad. The lowest average depth of target among all wide receivers in the entire NFL. And the Seahawks are running 2 tight end personnel at one of the higher rates in the NFL. You add that together, and he's competing for targets with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I know we talked about this a bunch yesterday on Team by Team. I have Jackson Smith and Jigba a bunch. I thought that they would go to more of a 3 wide receiver base. I thought JSN could earn targets at the expense of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett at a higher rate than he is. It's hard to give up on a guy that we think is really good like JSN after 3 weeks. I don't want to do that, but it's scary right now. If you're holding JSN bags, Mark, how are you doing? How are you playing it?
Yeah, well, I do have a lot of JSN bags, and especially once he broke his wrist and his price started to drop, I started drafting him on a lot of teams. So I'm in this situation in quite a few leagues. I think at this point it's just purely a bench stash, and you're kind of, if anything happens to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, then that would be the time to start Jackson Smith and Jigba. But at this point, I don't really think you can start him at all until that happens. We were hoping that in week 3 without Will Dissly that the Seattle offense would lean more into 3 wide receiver sets, but that didn't happen. They've been very efficient running 2 tight end sets early on. So I don't think offensively they're inclined to really change anything dramatically there anytime soon. But again, they did use a first round pick on JSN. He was the first wide receiver drafted. So eventually those guys, I think the cream will rise to the top a little bit, but you mentioned it's not like he's competing against slouches in Metcalf and Lockett. So I think he's a good bench stash right now. I'm holding out hope. I probably wouldn't drop him, because if I dropped him and then something happened and he launched into a big role, I would just be so sick about it. So for me, he's a pure bench stash right now, and we'll see what happens.
Right. And I'm really trying not to cut JSN. He is 1 injury away from having an awesome role. And I say that all the time about running backs, which is super valuable, but there are rare cases at the wide receiver position where, JSN would be a smash. And I like Palmer more than other people, but JSN would be a smash if something happened to Metcalf or Lockett there. Speaking of coming back, Jack, Alvin Kamara will be back this week. One of my moves to make last week was to add or buy Kendry Miller. We saw Kendry in his first NFL game, share work with Tony Jones and Taysom Hill last week. Now we're expecting Alvin Kamara to step right back in as the 1A with Kendry and whoever else they can get back out there, Tony Jones, Taysom, whatever, supporting Alvin Kamara. Now, I think that Alvin Kamara's role effectiveness last year was in decline. However, it's not like we've seen great stuff from Kendry Miller and we've seen bad stuff from Jamal Williams, who's on IR right now. So it's kind of a clear path here for Alvin Kamara. Jack, what do you think about Saints backfield? If you've been holding Alvin Kamara, obviously you are very, very excited right now. I doubt you'd want to dump him if you liked him enough to draft him in the first place. But yeah, any moves to make around Saints backfield?
Yeah, I was a little concerned about Kamara's role in the preseason with how they used Mark Ingram and David Johnson on passing downs last year. But I think with Jamal Williams on IR and then them using Tony Jones over Kendry Miller on passing downs in week 3, I think Kamara is in line for a pretty big role in his first game back. I think Tony Jones is pretty much going to go away. To be honest, I don't expect him to see the field that much. I think it's pretty much going to be Kamara and Kendry, and they showed last week that they don't really trust Kendry Miller yet on the passing down. So I think it's going to be a similar role like we've seen Kamara in the past, in that he's getting a lot of passing down work. He's splitting some of the early down stuff with Kendry Miller, but even last year he was regularly getting 14, 15 plus carries. So I think it could be a pretty decent role for Kamara.
Yeah. So do I. I'm still optimistic on Kendry, but I think at least out of the gate, it's going to be a pretty strong role. And then Kendry can get his 8, 9, 10 touches and have some standalone value there as well. Last rank change I wanted to get to, Mark, is this Adam Thielen stuff. So, it looked really bad for Adam Thielen in underlying metrics last year, like almost dead. But but he can get open. He can't even get open. That's not what I'm trying to say. He can earn targets because quarterbacks know where he's going to be, like throwing him the football. And I'm not sure you can say that about most of the other Panthers. We do have Jonathan Mingo ranked, but Adam Thielen went from unranked all the way up to 98th overall in our rankings. It's really, really hard, man. We've seen late career surges from old wide receivers when they get into the slot, and I would not shock me if that's what's happening here. There's also muddiness because Bryce Young, I think, is worse for Adam Thielen than Andy Dalton is, and Bryce Young could be back as soon as this week. So 98th overall on Adam Thielen, Mark, makes me sick, but I said, man, the guy's going to catch 80 balls this year, and he might catch more. He might catch like 90 or 100. I mean, it's wild out there for Adam Thielen right now. What do you think about handling him?
My top note on Thielen is that his role is different in Carolina this year, which is, I think, a positive and why we're seeing him get open a little bit more. He's played in the slot on 76% of his snaps, and that's pretty much the inverse of what it was in Minnesota. He was outside about 75 to 80% of the time and only in the slot about 20 to 25% of the time. So that is good news. I think, a little easier to get open over the middle of the field when you're going against linebackers, slot corners, safeties, that type of deal. And then he does have a good matchup against Minnesota this week, revenge game. And then they play, let's say they have another good matchup after that. They play the Lions after that, which is a pass defense we want to attack as well. So I think in the short term, like, we can be pretty confident about starting Adam Thielen. I think he is probably a legit wide receiver 3. We do have him a little lower in the rankings because I do think it is fair to question the longevity and how successful he's going to be over the course of the season as, a 32 or 33-year-old wide receiver. But in the offseason, we were kind of looking at this Carolina passing game like, okay, who's going to emerge? Is it going to be DJ Chark finally getting healthy and emerging? Can the rookie Jonathan Mingo do it? And as of now, it looks like Adam Thielen. So I think in the short term, it's good to bet on Adam Thielen. I think he's startable. We'll see how it goes with Bryce. It looks like Bryce Young is on track to start this week, so we'll see how it goes. But I think he's startable in the short term. It's just more the long term that I'm worried about.
Okay, let's get to the second segment of the show, which is your listener questions. We're going to do a few of these listener questions, and then we'll wrap up with our moves to make. I can't believe we're here, but we are here. J Whiskey FF asks, now that we know for sure Devon Achane is special, would you buy him over Derrick Henry? Feels weird to ask, but here we are. Allow me to service the audio listener here by saying where we have these guys ranked. We have Achane 82 overall and Derrick Henry, like we just mentioned, 48 overall. And so we do not have it that close. I think it speaks to a larger conversation, Jack, about A, Derrick Henry, which we already talked about, and B, Devon Achane after he broke out. So I wouldn't make this trade that J Whiskey FF is saying. However, I get where his head is at. What do you think about Achane, and if you would be trying to buy Achane, who you could be giving up for him? You're on mute, Jack.
Sorry. I think it's going to be pretty impossible to buy Achane this week after he was just the PPR RB1, had 51 fantasy points in PPR, I think. So I don't really think anyone's going to be trading him, but I do think it makes sense to try to be bullish on him. I don't know if I take him over Henry, but Raheem Mostert has been fantastic so far, but he has a long history of injuries. He's 31. Jeff Wilson's on IR, and also he hasn't shown the same upside that Achane showed in week 3. And Achane has the speed that we know Mike McDaniel covered so much. I don't think he's going to be possible to get. But I do think that we have him next to Pacheco and Dameon Pierce. I think I take him over both of those guys, to be honest. Just from an upside perspective, I think that those guys probably don't have the same top 8 upside that Achane probably does rest of season. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I think just zooming back on Devon Achane, they were playing the Broncos. Salvon Ahmed was out. Jeff Wilson's on IR. And I love Devon Achane. And I know he was one of our favorite guys pre-draft and everything. I think anybody would have gone nuts on the Broncos that day, right? Like if Jeff Wilson was in there, he would have gone nuts. Now, he wouldn't have had the same long runs because the HN is so fast and explosive. But yeah, I don't want to get too crazy on HN. I like where we have him ranked here in the 80s. I don't think he's ever getting to, 15, 20 touches a game regularly for this Dolphins team. And so, yeah, I like him. I love having him. I want to have him. But I definitely think it's not even close for me between Derrick Henry and Devon Achane. Okay. Bears rest of season. So from the names Jib, he says Bears running backs. How do you view Khalil Herbert versus Roschon Johnson, especially with how bad this offense has been? So this was something we talked about behind the scenes when doing the rest of season top 150. What kind of value does Khalil Herbert really have when he's sharing carries, sharing work, and he has to give up a lot of goal line stuff to Justin Fields, and this team is not going to score very many points. So we settled here on Khalil Herbert 110 overall, Roschon Johnson 117 overall. Mark, how do you view Herbert versus Roschon rest of season?
It's definitely close. I think the one good thing I'll say is it can't get any worse. So, only up for both of these guys at this point. I think just in terms of offensive environment, Khalil Herbert, we were thinking maybe against the Chiefs that Roschon Johnson might take over kind of the 1A role and be used more in the passing game. And that didn't really happen until late in the fourth quarter. Khalil Herbert still had 5 rush attempts to Roschon Johnson's 2 in the first half and still looks like the 1A there. So, we have him close in the rankings, which I think is right. I think, potentially Roschon Johnson could be ahead of him rest of the season, just again, as a rookie that this team has invested in. But, Khalil Herbert has also kind of been, in this organization, in this regime for a bit, finally getting his opportunity with David Montgomery gone. So I don't know. This is tough for me. I do lean Roschon slightly just because of the rookie and kind of unseen upside. But, Herbert has flashed efficiency in the past too, in his opportunities. So it's a little tough for me. I think I would prioritize Roschon just because, especially with more leagues being half PPR and full PPR, like I do think his pass catching upside is higher. So in PPR, I'll go with Roschon there as a priority, and half PPR, which is what this rankings are, I think I'd still have Herbert slightly ahead.
I mean, 2 things on this. First of all, Roschon's more likely to play in garbage time, which the Bears are going to see a lot of. And secondly, if you were going to do something about Bears, whether trade them away or cut them or trade for them, if you want to trade for them, I'd be doing it now before this Broncos game. Like if they are ever going to do anything on offense, it will be against the Broncos this weekend. If they fail against the Broncos, you're not going to be able to get rid of any Bear. I mean, if they fail against the Broncos, like it's just over. Interesting one here from BTR. Jack, he says, would you trade away Kyren Williams and Amari Cooper for Cooper Kupp in a 10-team start 2 wide receiver PPR league? So I'm going to save my comment because I do have a comment about Amari Cooper in the moves to make section. I will say on Kyren Williams, maybe you can, but playing 100% of the running back snaps, being a monster in pass pro and returning punts and having a big role in the pass game, like, can Kyren Williams survive this? I mean, can he go the whole year in this role? I think it's a legitimate question. The other legitimate question with this trade question from BTR is, I haven't heard anything about Cooper Kupp. Are we sure Cooper Kupp's even running? Are we sure Cooper Kupp is even out there running routes? He's eligible to come back in week 5, but I haven't heard a single thing about it. So this is a really hard one, Jack. What do you think about Kyren Williams and Amari Cooper for Cooper Kupp?
Yeah, I lean Kyren Williams here, but any trade involving Kupp is either going to look really good or really bad in hindsight, I think. But with the Kupp stuff being so scary and having no news, it makes me a little fearful to trade for him right now. I do agree with you that Kyren Williams, it makes sense to be skeptical about him sustaining this role the entire year. But I also don't think that he needs to sustain like this role for him to have some fantasy value. And we know the Rams love him. We know he's a good pass catcher, a good pass blocker. So I think he's going to have a role the entire year. And then Amari Cooper has a 24% target share for a passing offense that it's not a good passing offense, or at least we haven't seen that much from Deshaun Watson so far. But even getting that level of volume has some worth in fantasy. So I would lean Kyren and Amari in this one.
Okay. There was a good question here. Oh, from Gabe Train, he says, is now the time to try to sell Alexander Madison? Or should we hope that he can put up good numbers against the Panthers before Akers takes too much work and then dump him? So everybody's under the assumption that Cam Akers is going to come in and take a huge chunk out of Alexander Madison. And maybe that's true. That's not really the way I think it's likeliest to go. And I know Madison's been bad, but they just keep going right back to him. I mean, dude fumbles, they go back to him. Dude gets stuffed at the 1 yard line, they go back to him. They go back to him. They go back to him. They weren't even giving Ty Chandler chances. Now, we saw another fumble from Madison that actually he luckily did not get called to fumble, and the team is 0-3 now. So I think there's a little bit more fragility on Madison roll here. We did get Cam Akers into the top 150 at 147 overall. But yeah, if you have Madison right now, Mark, is it a time to sell?
I just don't know what people are going to pay for Madison, because I think everyone is like, oh, they just traded for Cam Akers. He's going to play week 4, and so that dilutes Madison's value in fantasy. So I don't know if you're going to get a fair value in return. It's certainly a tough, situation to analyze. I'm more in the camp of holding Alexander Madison, and hopefully Akers comes in with a lesser role than we're expecting. And even if he does eat into Madison's role, I think it's going to be more on base downs, kind of between the 20s. I would imagine with Madison, with the contract they gave him in the offseason, he's still going to be the goal line back. He played 100% of the 2-minute snaps in week 3. So I think the passing role will still be there for him, and probably the goal line role early on, unless he keeps fumbling away these opportunities. So I would lean more so hold Madison at this point.
The Richard O says, is it time to sell high on Kenneth Walker with Charbonnet's snaps increasing? I want to be clear on this. Charbonnet's snaps are increasing, but not really at the expense of Kenneth Walker. It's more DJ Dallas type stuff. So I don't want to panic on Kenneth Walker at all. We actually have Kenneth Walker ranked very high, and I feel good about that. Just good offense, good player. I know it's going to be ugly some weeks when he gets stuffed at the line a bunch. But yeah, I don't think I want to be selling Kenneth Walker. Jack, any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I'm with you there. DJ Dallas still got the third down stuff, but Charbonnet was out there running routes more, and he got the 2-minute drill. But Kenneth Walker was still the primary guy on early downs. I think for Charbonnet to really burst into like top 24 contention, he needs a Walker injury, and he's going to take some passing downs, but that's not really Walker's bread and butter anyway. So he's going to get the carries. Some weeks he's going to score touchdowns and be super efficient, and like you said, some weeks he'll get 30 yards on 15 carries. But I think overall holding Walker makes sense.
Last one I want to take here is from S. Rob. He says, what do you think Tua took about lowest trade value as I'm looking for a wide receiver in return? I don't know what tier wide receiver I could get back, and it might just be better to keep him standard non-PPR league. This is always the issue in one quarterback leagues. The trade market for quarterback is like non-existent because everybody has a pretty good quarterback, and there's going to be good quarterbacks on waivers that you can stream in also. And so even though we have Tua here ranked reasonably high, pretty high, I feel like in the trade market, Mark, we have Tua 47 overall. In the trade market, you're not going to get that because it's a quarterback and they're just not that valuable. So yeah, if you're looking for a wide receiver in return here for Tua, I mean, the wide receivers we have ranked around Tua are like Zay Flowers, Christian Watson, DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, whatever. I doubt somebody's going to give you those guys for Tua, but I would probably do that if I could. What do you think about Tua's trade value in the wide receiver market right now?
This is actually an interesting question, because I was thinking about putting Tua as a potential sell high and the moves to make column. I ended up going in a different direction, but I do think like with how the kind of higher end quarterbacks have struggled thus far, we've seen a really poor start to the season for Joe Burrow. Justin Fields has completely tanked. Like Trevor Lawrence has been uninspiring to start. And then, kind of the top end guys haven't separated as much early on. And so Tua looks amazing, I think, right now in the trade market. So I expect this offense to continue to be highly efficient, obviously with Tyreek and Waddle, but certainly if you got Tua late, I know he went a lot later in home leagues than kind of like in best ball drafts and certain sharper leagues. So there's a chance you have Tua and like Daniel Jones or Tua, you could have multiple quarterbacks there where you can trade Tua. In terms of wide receivers that I would target, I do think kind of the guys right above that we have in the rankings, maybe a Christian Watson, I know is potential buy low for us right now. Mike Evans looks really strong. Michael Pittman, kind of guys in that range, that mid-tier wide receiver 2, I think is realistic. I don't think you can get a wide receiver 1 back for him, maybe you can. I think it's worth potentially shooting your shot, but certainly I think now just Miami in general, I think is a decent sell high offense.
You can tell the person that Tua Tagovailoa is the NFL leader in the MVP race. I'm giving you the MVP for Zay freaking Flowers. How can you turn that down? That would be my sell. Okay. We're going to end here with moves to make. We're each going to do 2 moves to make here. I will start. I am going to go with buy, trade for Christian Watson. And so there's probably a lot of Christian Watson teams out there that are 0-3, 1-2. They might be pretty desperate to get rid of him right now. I thought Christian Watson had a real chance to play last week, week 3, but they held him out with their eye on this Thursday division game against the Lions. The way Christian Watson wins is big plays deep down the field. And that's what we've seen from Jordan Love so far. Without really the personnel to match it, Jordan Love has been pushing the ball deep down the field, leads the entire NFL in average depth of target. And so it is a perfect fit for Christian Watson with Jordan Love. I think there'll be some ugly games, but there'll be some monster games for Christian Watson too, assuming he can keep this hamstring right. And so I like trying to buy right now on Christian Watson as my first move to make. Jack, I'll throw it to you for your first move to make.
Yeah, I'm going to do buy Jordan Addison. His route rate has grown each week of the season. And unlike some of these other rookie wide receivers like Zay Flowers, like Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's actually getting targeted down the field on more real routes. He has a 13.5 average depth of target. He only has a 14% target share so far, but given his production in college as well as the first round draft capital, it's just betting on him to eventually earn more targets. Granted, that is more difficult, easier said than done against Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, but I do think he can distance himself from KJ Osborne as the pretty clear wide receiver 2 in Minnesota. And then if something happens to Jefferson or Hawkinson, then there's a ton of upside there. And we talked about Alexander Madison's struggles so far and what they could do at running back. Well, so far, Minnesota's answer to their running game struggles has just been to throw the ball more. Their 6.3% pass rate over expectation is tied for second in the league. So this is a very high volume passing offense. Addison's route rate is growing each week. He's getting targeted on real routes, even though he's in his first month of his professional career. So I like trading for Jordan Addison right now.
All right. Buying on Jordan Addison for Jack. By the way, I think one of Jack's last week was buy on Tank Dell, which looks like pure sex right now. Mark, you're first.
We're going to be buying all the wide receivers because I have another one here, and that's buy Calvin Ridley. I think after week 1, everyone was extremely excited about him, went over 100 yards and a touchdown against the Colts. And then in the last 2 weeks, only about 5 catches for, 72 yards and no touchdowns. I think the public really overrates drops and how sticky drops are. They are typically not very sticky for players. And Calvin Ridley currently leads the NFL with 4 drops right now. 2 of those, I believe, would have led to touchdowns as well. So, his fortunes really could look different if he just caught those balls, which I'm expecting him to moving forward. Trevor Lawrence is still playing well. The Jags offense just hasn't really been clicking yet. A couple small plays here and there. And so I think, Jags D is vulnerable. The Jaguars offense going to continue to throw. So I think now is a decent time to buy Calvin Ridley.
Buy Calvin Ridley. Yeah. I mean, the drops have been egregious and the drops have been big plays, not like little flares where he's going to get tackled. I mean, we're talking massive touchdown plays that Calvin Ridley has dropped. My second move to make is going to be sell on the Browns pass game. Now, I don't know what you could get for Deshaun Watson right now. I don't know what you can necessarily get for Elijah Moore right now. You could probably get something decent or good for Amari Cooper. My concern is that this was the best game I've seen Deshaun Watson play in 3 years. And it happened to come against what could be the worst pass defense in the entire NFL in the Tennessee Titans because they're so good against the run. It just makes everyone look so good when you face them as a pass game. If this is the best game that Deshaun Watson in the pass game has all year, it's going to look really sharp to sell on them now. And so, yeah, they have some difficult matchups coming up. They're going to play some of these ugly AFC North games that get real ugly. And so I like selling on Browns pass game now. The sell that you make can be like, listen, Nick Chubb is down. They have to go more pass heavy. Look at the game that Deshaun Watson had this past week. He's back, baby. I'm skeptical that the Browns pass game and Deshaun Watson is actually back. Jack, how about your second move to make of the week?
Yeah, this is kind of inversely correlated to your Christian Watson take. I'm going to do sell Romeo Dobbs. I've been lower on Dobbs the whole offseason, and this week I think there's a perfect culmination of factors to sell him. He had 12 targets last week, turned that into 5 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown. But now Christian Watson is back. Dobbs averaged 6.3 yards per target last year, 6.5 this year. I think he's not that special of a talent, and he's just kind of been thrust into a big role because the Packers don't have anyone else. But with Christian Watson coming back and with Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave both looking pretty good in the early going, and it's their first year in the league, they've both played 3 professional games, and Musgrave's playing a position that historically tends to come on pretty slowly. So I think Dobbs is slowly going to lose targets to Watson, to Reed, to Musgrave. Aaron Jones is coming back too, and he'll take a good chunk of looks. So it would not surprise me at all if Dobbs has almost no value by the end of the fantasy season. So I'd be looking to get out now.
Yeah, I think he'll always have some value, but, there's tons of Romeo Dobbs fanboys out there. He has not looked good from an underlying metric perspective in his NFL career. As Jack said, we have Christian Watson well ahead, like 60 plus spots, 70 plus spots ahead of Romeo Dobbs, which I think makes sense. Certainly running hot on touchdowns right now. Mark, your final move to make. And by the way, Mark had some smashes last week. Sell low on Dameon Pierce and buy high on Michael Pittman last week. Look really, really good. I mean, my God, Dameon Pierce, no matter what the script is, they were winning this game the entire game. Dameon Pierce still didn't play the whole game and have a great role. So yeah, that was a good one for Mark last week. But anyways, Mark, I digress. What is your second and final move to make?
Well, I like Jack's a lot because it's kind of selling on a player who scored 2 touchdowns through 3 weeks. And I think just selling high on players that have, early touchdown success is generally a good thing to do. And I'm going to lean into that with sell Raheem Mostert. I like Raheem Mostert. He's one of my, a player I like to root for, certainly hoping he does well, but I just don't think there's going to be a higher evaluation of Raheem Mostert this entire season than right now. Obviously came off a 4 touchdown game against the Broncos, just historic level production from that running back room. As we've mentioned on the show today and in weeks past, he's 31 years old, never been that one to stay healthy for an entire season. Jeff Wilson is on IR right now, likely to return after week 4. And I think he will likely eat more into Mostert's, or has a chance to eat more into Mostert's role than Achane. And then their schedule does toughen up a little bit the next few weeks. And then when you look at the playoff schedule, which I kind of hate to do now because that's several months away, not sure what's going to happen between now and then, but they do get the Jets, Dallas, and Baltimore, who are 3 solid defense, especially the Jets and Dallas defensive line. So when when we're kind of starting to plan for the playoffs again, long way away right now, I get that. But I think now is just the perfect time to sell Raheem Mostert based on how highly he's valued in the market.
You mentioned playoff schedule. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in my Christian Watson take that the Packers fantasy playoff schedule is Bucks at home, at Panthers, at Vikings in championship week. I mean, at Vikings in championship week, you get the game indoors, you get the dome. I mean, dude, Christian Watson, please stay healthy. My family, we need it. Okay. That is going to do it for this rest of season top 150 show. Appreciate all of you checking in. Appreciate all of you who submitted questions. We'll do this every week. Stay tuned to the Established to Run Twitter. We'll be asking for questions on there for this show. If you have not yet picked up your in-season product, establishedtherun.com/subscribe gets you access to our rest of season top 150, all our projections and rankings every week and all the context that goes around all that. For Jack, for Mark, for producer Adam, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.